the elven kings under the sky. 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone. 9 for mortal men doomed to die. 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them. 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. In the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. This is the War of the Ring.
Welcome everyone, Costini here with War of the Ring, the RTS. Not to be confused with the board game or any other title, because there are other titles that use this name, War of the Ring or War of the Rings, dependent on where you're looking for it. War of the Ring is a game that's been out for almost 2 decades, and unlike many other older games, many other strategy games like Age of Empires, Command & Conquer and all that, it has actually aged very well. You can pick up the game, start playing it, and the only issue you're going to encounter is actually with resolution, but there is a patch for that. Outside of resolution, however, frame rate wise, performance wise, bug wise, the game is very functional, which again is something you can't really say for a lot of games from this particular time period. But what is War of the Ring? War of the Ring is a real-time strategy game developed by Liquid Entertainment, the developers of Battle Realms. It follows, for the most part, the formula created in Battle Realms, with the exception of one of the major gameplay features of that game, which is the peasant economy. Like, you would take peasants, put them in buildings, train them, and then maybe go through several rounds of training to get different units, like artillery, melee units, range units, all that kind of stuff. In War of the Ring, it's more traditional. You just train units from specific buildings. Now, people compared it disfavorably when it came out to Warcraft 3. And there might be some truth to that, but again, it's more similar in terms of overall gameplay style to Battle Realms than it is to Warcraft 3, though there certainly were some influences in from Warcraft 3. Though it's worth saying, Battle Realms came out at about the same time as Warcraft 3. And also an interesting tidbit, War of the Ring was also published by Sierra. Sierra was owned by Vivendi. Vivendi owned Blizzard. So if we're making accusations of copycats, well, it might make sense that there are at least some similarities between 2 games that are ultimately created by the same parent company, even if the developers are very different. I'm not sure if there were orders from high up to copy some things, or if the developers from Liquid Entertainment decided to implement certain things from Warcraft 3 in War of the Ring. But certainly some similarities. The game looks pretty good on a technical level, even to this day. The graphics, the technical graphics, are really solid. The artistic choices, however, the cartoonish look, doesn't really do the game any favors from my perspective, compared to the very grounded and more realistic look of Battle for Middle-earth. Now, these games, Battle for Middle-earth, Return of the King, War of the Ring, were movie tie-in games, really, or movie shovelware. Games released roughly at about the same time that the movies were being very popular, to take advantage of that popularity and sell copies. However, War of the Ring was not a movie license game. The movie license was exclusively handled by Electronic Arts. New Line Cinema gave it to EA. War of the Ring had a book license, and it doesn't really follow the storyline of the books. It's more about certain events, certain scenarios that they're creating for the purposes of a campaign, though calling it a campaign is probably pushing too far. It's more like a couple of mini campaigns put strung together in a number of scenarios. There's isolated scenarios that are certain scenarios linked together, but an overarching campaign, not so much for either side. There's 2 sides. There's the good side, comprised of humans, of Rohan and Gondor, elves and dwarves, And then there's the evil side, trolls, orcs, Urkai, Haradrim, all that. Those are your two main factions of the game, and you have 2 campaigns, one for each side, comprising of a decent number of scenarios. Though it's not these are not necessarily very long campaign. Outside the campaigns, honestly, the skirmish mode and the multiplayer don't really have a lot to offer. I think there were some bad decisions when it came to multiplayer in particular. Why? Because there's control points on the maps that give you significant buffs if you hold them. But there's a randomness factor to it in terms of the benefits. You could start with a base right next to a control point that buffs the HP of your units by quite a substantial amount, giving you an enormous advantage in any multiplayer match that your opponent may very well not have. So multiplayer balance is not all that great. Beyond that, War of the Ring is fairly traditional. You build a base, you have 3 resources, you have food, and you have iron. You gather them up, you have water stockpiles and iron stockpiles around the map. Several camps, really, base locations that you can use as a player. And the recommendation, if you're playing this game, is really to in the campaign is really to try and get at least 2 or even 3 bases for resource gathering, so you can build units much faster. If you're turtling up, if you're only limiting yourself to 1 base, 1, you'll run out of resources eventually, but 2, and more importantly, you'll be much slower. Now, the game isn't particularly challenging, nor is it particularly long. I think in total, you're probably looking at about a dozen hours at most or so to finish this game. But getting the game can be something of a challenge. Because of the licensing situation, there is simply no way to buy a new copy, unless you're looking at eBay. There are some brand new copies that were never opened for about $50 or more on eBay. There's also used copies for $6, $7, $10 on eBay as well. And honestly, I would not pay $50, but $6 to $10 for a copy of this game, it's pretty decent. It's a game that works, that's important. There's a lot of older games that might be really fun, or they were fun back in the day, but they just don't work on modern systems, or games that haven't aged all that well from a gameplay standpoint. War of the Ring is not one of those games. However, it's not exactly the most exceptional game that was ever released. A lot of these movie shovelware titles, like the Harry Potter games, the Lord of the Rings games, they weren't really the best of games, most of them. Some were pretty bad, most of them really were mediocre. What carried, I'd say, the Lord of the Rings games by EA was the movie soundtrack, the focus on recreating the movie world in a video game form. War of the Ring doesn't have that particular charm, and doesn't really have anything to carry it forward. It doesn't have an excellent story, doesn't have superb gameplay, doesn't have an enticing campaign experience, or a skirmish or multiplayer experience. It is just an average game. That's how I describe it. It's an average, pretty forgettable game. I'd call it the forgotten RTS. Now, I want to talk about both of these campaigns, as I've played them not too long ago to completion. My recommendation is if you're picking this game up, install it, then get the patch that gives you 1080p support. I don't think there is anything for 1440p or 4K, which was a bit of a disappointment, but playing the game in 1080p is pretty good enough in its own right. So, and even if you don't use that patch, the game is, as I've said, pretty functional. You won't feel frustrated by the controls or the performance or the bugs, the glitches, the low FPS, as you might trying to play many other games that are old. Like, when I grew up, I was playing Dune 2, which created the real-time strategy genre. I would not want to play Dune 2 in this day and age. It just hasn't aged all that well. Even with modern mods that try and make it, or recreations that try and increase the performance and all that, it just feels very outdated. That's not the kind of feeling that I get when playing War of the Ring, however. War of the Ring, for all of its issues, gameplay issues, story issues, campaign issues, is still a fairly playable experience, even today, which is something that I can say about Command & Conquer 1, for instance, or Red Alert 1, or even 2, really. Or, well, Red Alert 2 is very playable, but Tiberium Wars 2, the second Tiberium game, not so much. Different discussion, however. But anyway, let's get into the campaigns, and I'm gonna start with the good side. So in each of the campaigns, you have a number of scenarios. playing the good campaign, I started with the 2 dwarven scenarios. The first mission is pretty easy, pretty clear. Just clear the map of enemies, throw the rocks on an enemy base. The second mission, however, sees you with a base. You do have a base in the first mission, but you have to build a base from scratch in the second mission, get an expansion point, and then get a very powerful catapult to wipe out the enemy army that's opposing you. You can't win this mission, the second mission, traditionally. These 2 missions involve Gimli, and the way they structure the good campaign is you have missions with Gimli, you have missions with different heroes to introduce them, if you will, in the campaign. With Gimli, you're really dealing with an orcish invasion of dwarven lands. And you build an army, you build a base, you hold the line, and then you use a very powerful catapult that apparently was built by foreign Oakenshield, who had been away from Erebor for a very long time and only entered it briefly before the Battle of 5 Armies before he was killed during said battle. How Foreign may have built such a catapult is unknown, but you do need to build a catapult to repair it, really, and then use it to destroy the enemy base. Meanwhile, you're facing off waves upon waves of enemies attacking both the catapult and your main base, or your bases in general, your expansion point as well. The orcs can attack all of the points at the same time, or multiple attacks at the same time, and you have to defend against all of them. You only have access to dwarven units in the first 2 missions of the campaign, Dwarven Axe Thrower and Dwarven Shield Breakers. Axe Throwers are pretty solid range units, and in a lot of older strategy games, fantasy strategy games, the range meta is really powerful. Whereas melee units are more there to hold the line. That said, Shield Breakers are useful because with a certain upgrade, they can reduce the armor of enemies, and this can stack dependent on the number of shield breakers that you do have hitting a particular target. So if you amass a large number of them, you can do some real damage. By the way, not really too challenging here. It's more of a defense mission that you're dealing with in the second one. In the first one, your starting army can be enough to actually clear it out, even on the hardest difficulty. You do have heroes, and you do have special abilities as well to use. These special abilities can heal, can blind enemies, can summon Ents or Balrogs. And on the good side, specifically, you do have an ability to make a super powerful version of, or a buff version of your heroes, but they can't be revived. However, that's not really a downside in the campaign, seeing as in many missions, if you lose your hero, you might lose the mission completely, or you might as well lose the mission. Basically, you buff the heroes, the chances of them dying is going to be very low, and you can always extract them from losing battle unless things are going completely badly for you and you've lost the mission anyway. So that's the introduction with Gimli. After he deals with the orcs, the story goes that Sauron gave up on trying to conquer the Iron Hills and Erebor and sent emissaries, as is canon. Like the whole orcish invasion, they made that up for the game. But Sauron did send emissaries to try and convince the dwarves. The dwarves rejected them, and instead Gimli and Glóin were sent to the council of Elrond, where Gimli would end up joining the Fellowship. After the mission with Gimli, we have several missions, free missions, with Legolas, that start with the hunt for Gollum, with Legolas and a bunch of elven archers eventually joined by some rangers, going from Mirkwood trying to chase down Gollum and dealing with spiders that are blocking their path. Eventually, however, they are attacked by a group of orcs, and Legolas decides that it's a far bigger priority to deal with the orcs that are apparently coming out of Minas Morgul than to chase down after Gollum. So he decides to do just that. The first mission is just trekking around dealing with spiders until you encounter the orcs. The second mission is dealing with an orcish base, and the third mission is about dealing with Minas Morgul. I would argue quite strongly that they could have just made a single mission out of this with different levels, as opposed to just having 3 different but pretty short overall missions. Here you are introduced with the Ranger unit. The Ranger unit is a human ranger that I'm guessing stands for the Rangers of Velian. What they're doing in Mirkwood then is unknown. They're your detector units. There are perma-invisible units in this game. The Rangers are important to sniff them out. Their combat stats are nowhere near as great as some other units, but they are important for that detector role. And one of the things you can do if you have a lot of resources is, well, you can spam quite a lot of them and use them as your basic infantry unit. The good side in skirmish and multiplayer and much later in the campaign, the good side, the basic infantry unit is the Gondorian soldier. The ranger has very similar stats to the Gondorian soldiers, but obviously it's better because of the detection capability, though a bit more expensive. And then you also have some elven units that you get during these missions. The most important of these is the elven archer, which works really well with Legolas, who can buff attack speed of units and also give them ranged defense. The elven archer can also get a perma stealth ability, though with all the enemy detectors it's not necessarily as powerful as you might believe. However, range meta being what it is, elven archers are really going to be the unit that you're going to end up being spamming throughout the course of the campaign when you do have them available, though you don't have them in every mission. Anyway, Legolas builds an army, takes down Minas Morgul, deals with a Nazgul and a vast horde of enemies. There are certainly a lot of enemies that the game does throw against you, but it is quite very easy ultimately with multiple bases, with your main base and an expansion or 2 expansions, to just pump out such a large number of ranged units with full upgrades that you're just wiping them out with relative ease and without too many issues. The only real problem you encounter with Minas Morgul, the only issue I encounter with Minas Morgul, is actually taking the fortress, because enemies spawn continuously during the fortress from various points, and your job is to get to the very top and deal with Khamul, the Nazgul who controls the fortress. It is annoying, and the pathfinding in these kind of fortress scenarios is not really that great. And this does actually showcase one of the issues of the game. The terrain work is really lacking in a lot of maps. Like, a lot of maps are open fields, more or less, where you build bases. But whenever you encounter a map like Minas Morgul, though there's not that many of them, and you have more elaborate terrain work, you find out the pathfinding of the game is just not suited for it. It's actually a similar problem that Battle Realms has. These are games that work really well on large open maps. When you have something more closed off, you really do notice the pathfinding issues and the gameplay issues, and this really became apparent to me with Minas Morgul. After Minas Morgul, you do have a mission at Osgiliath, at the first battle of Osgiliath, with Boromir and Faramir. Boromir and Faramir are campaign-only heroes, whereas Legolas and Gimli, you can use them in multiplayer and skirmish. Boromir and Faramir are far more limited and only available for certain missions in the campaign. Boromir for 2, Faramir only for this one. In this mission, you only have units of Rohan and Gondor, and you can really only train Gondorian soldiers, Rohirrim, as well as rangers. You do also have a number of Rohan archers, which have pretty much the same stats, minus the perma-invisibility of the elven archers, but you can get a couple of these guys throughout the mission. Even though you are limited by the melee nature of your army with some range units and support, this mission is not necessarily very difficult. Rohirrim units can be good in some ways, but they are not really stand-up units. But with the combination of Rohirrim units and Gondorian units, you take the city, take the west bank of the city, destroy one of the bridges, and force Sauron in a stalemate. After that, Boromir goes to join the Fellowship and deal with his ultimate fate, whereas Faramir is left behind to try and hold the line. And once you do these missions, once you do the Legolas mission, the Boromir mission, and the Gimli missions, you are dealt with a mission involving the entire Fellowship, minus Gandalf, in Lothlorien, where you are trying to defend Lothlorien from an invasion from the Orcs and Goblins of Moria, who had chased the Fellowship from Moria. This is something that I believe did actually happen in the books, if I remember correctly, or it was mentioned in some conversation. It's been a while since I've read Lord of the Rings, but I do believe that the Orcs did certainly put pressure on Lothlorien during this period, and there was actually a battle under the trees at about the same time that the Battle of Helm's Deep was actually being fought. So either way, you have to hold 2 special trees that are going to drive the Orcs insane. You start with a base, you have an expansion point, you have a lot of heroes part of the Fellowship, though it's not recommended necessarily to use the Hobbits, as they are pretty weak. The Hobbits can be main base defense, whereas your other heroes, like Legolas, Boromir, Aragorn, and Gimli work with a large number of elven units, chiefly elven archers, to hold the trees. This is where your powers summon ability of an Ent. An Ent is a really powerful unit, really comes in handy, as you will be dealing with a large number of goblin, orc, and troll units descending on your base. But eventually, if you manage to hold the line, the trees activate and the orcs and trolls are driven away in fear and panic, driven insane by the music of the trees, if you will. And after this, you unlock missions in Rohan, Helm's Deep, and a mission in a city called Upborn. Upborn is a bit interesting, as you do have Erkenbrand, who was one of the marshals of Rohan, and actually, in the books, he was the one who rode, or rather came to the defense of Helm's Deep with Gandalf. Though, unlike Elmer in the movies, he came with a bunch of infantry. However, here the Rohirrim units are really only represented in the Army of Good, chiefly through their cavalry riders. You do have a mission in Upborn where you're liberating the city. Keep in mind that this is before, this is in tandem pretty much with the Battle of Helm's Deep. So instead of rushing to save Helm's Deep, Erkenbrand is just messing around, liberating this unimportant city when the fate of the entirety of Rohan came down to the Battle of Helm's Deep. By the way, you have access to a lot of different units in this scenario, including elven units. So hey, enjoy your stealth elven units that have no reason to be there story-wise, helping liberate the city of Rohan. Once you do that, you have the Battle of Helm's Deep, from a timeline perspective at the very least. Though you can fight Helm's Deep before you do this mission. At Helm's Deep, you have Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas, along with a bunch of random Gondorians and Rohirrim, trying to hold the line against Uruk-hai, against the armies of Isengard. What's interesting here is that Isengard's army is represented not just by Uruk-hai, though they do exist, they're a special unit on the side of evil, a ranged unit, but also by regular orcs and goblins, which is actually canonically accurate. The Uruk-hai were not an entire army, they did not represent the entire army that Saruman sent against Helm's Deep. Instead, Saruman had a bunch of orcs, goblins, and even men, the Dunedains, who are not represented in this game in any way, shape, or form. But it is more accurate. Either way, you have to hold the Deeping Wall initially with Gimli and Legolas, though canonically speaking, it was Aragorn and Elmer who were fighting alongside the length and breadth of the wall until the orcs blew it up. That does happen in this case. You hold with Legolas and Gimli while Aragorn holds the main gate. You keep getting a bunch of reinforcements at certain intervals. The way this mission works is that you do get a bunch of reinforcements around the mission that you want to preserve for the later stages. You also get certain objectives, like hold the Deeping Wall for a certain period of time, kill a certain number of orcs. These give you attack and defense upgrades, which from my perspective were going to be very useful later on in the mission. Now, people can complain about the camera here because the default camera on this mission is annoying. Some people have reported, like Mandalore Gaming, when he made his review of this game, he reported having camera issues here and you couldn't reset the camera to the default one. But really, the big problem with this mission is not orcs, it's the pathfinding again. Your ranged units are supposedly behind the wall, but they will move in really, really odd ways to attack units that are out in the open, instead of just standing their position, and you can't order them to hold their ground. And that ends up being very, very frustrating, adding to the nature of a game that works pretty well when it comes to open maps, which do constitute the vast majority of maps that you do have in the campaign. But when you add in the pathfinding of Helm's Deep, the map design, it just really starts falling apart and creates a great deal of frustration. I sense this the most during the ram attack on the main gate. After Legolas and Gimli abandoned the Deeping Wall, the orcs send a massive ram on the main gate. There's a couple of problems with this ram. If they destroy the main gate, that ram, which can do a lot of damage in its own right, is going to kill Theoden. You lose Theoden, which you can't control, you lose the map. So you really need to kill this ram before it can kill Theoden. It's basically like a boss in its own right. The problem is that the ram has a great deal of HP, and at the same time that the ram is here, you have a swarm of orcs trying to attack the main gate. It's quite easy to lose your entire army, even the ones that you've built together during this particular fight. Ultimately, you just want to kill that ram quickly, because one of the problems with the ram is you might think that the best thing to do would be to have your ranged units deal with orcs and your melee units just hitting the ram. Pretty reasonable. The problem is your ranged units will be very much attracted to the ram, shooting it while swarms of orcs kill your melee unit, so you really need to micromanage. I found this entire part of the scenario frustrating. Sometimes it was easy as hell. I played this mission multiple times. Sometimes I found it very easy. Other times I found it a genuine frustration and difficult. Either way, once the ram is dealt with, you do have to defend the position at the main keep for a reasonable length of time. Until Theoden decides that he's gonna commit a suicide charge, gets a bunch of Rohirrim to spawn, charges down off the gate. Though thankfully, by this point, you should have killed enough orcs that the enemy resistance is going to be fairly insignificant. Gandalf and Erkenbrand arrive with a bunch of other Rohirrim riders, and a massive army of horns, really ants, but different. Trees, walking trees anyway, show up, as they did canonically in both the books and the movies. Though there's a deleted scene that's only as part of the extended cut in the movies, but the horns do help slaughter the orcs. And you are left with quite a lot of orcs and goblins and Uruk-hai killed on the field, and as Aragorn put it, not one of the enemy was spared. At least not among the orcs, the goblins, and the Uruk-hai. Though the Dunedains were shown mercy canonically by the Rohirrim. So with that scenario out of the way, what are you left with? That is a good question. At this point, you have Gandalf rejoining you, and you are left with just 2 missions. One of which is dealing with Minas Morgul. Minas Morgul can be a pretty painful one, because you constantly have Nazgul potentially trying to attack your base. Although the trick here is that you need to find the checkpoint where all the slave masters are coming from. The way it works is that the side of evil has slave masters. These slave masters put up a post that puts corruption, Zerg creep, undead corruption, whatever, inspiration for Warcraft 3 and even StarCraft and that. The Nazgul, the script here is that the Nazgul want to have these slave masters put out these posts at random positions on the map, and then they teleport and attack your base. Here's the thing though. There is a checkpoint, a bridge specifically, through which all of these slave masters are going to come. You position your army or heroes there, you're going to have an easy time. The only issue here is that you do have a fairly sizable troll army at the start of the mission, though I found it pretty easy with my 4 heroes, which by this point were high max level with all their abilities unlocked, to deal with this army. One of the things to mention is that heroes in the campaign do carry their levels over, and it's actually quite possible to max them out in the mission that you get them. Especially the heroes that do go throughout the entire campaign, like Aragorn, Gilny, Legolas. And there is a bit of an issue with things like Boromir, Faramir, and Erkenbrand, which only are there for 1 or 2 missions at most. By the way, with your 4 heroes and a vast army of elven archers, reliant on the good, solid elven archers, you do break the spine of the Mordor forces. You don't even really get attacked in your base if you hold that bridge. Just hold the bridge, eventually advance past it, decimate the enemy, take back Minas Morgul. The liberation of Minas Morgul actually happened after the Battle of the Black Gate, canonically speaking. Aragorn only really left about the force of, I think it was 500 archers at the crossroads to hold back any potential attack from Minas Morgul, and instead march to the Black Gate because that was more important. Speaking about the Black Gate, it is the final mission of the Good campaign. And in this one, again, you get all your heroes. You start with a decent army, I guess, and you have to deal with all the enemy forces strewn between you and the Black Gate. Now, this is not the Battle of the Black Gate. This is rather a battle for a pass to reach the Black Gate. Doesn't make sense lore-wise, since the terrain, speaking canonically, would actually be fairly open. But yeah, I guess they didn't want to have the Battle of Black Gate. Maybe copyright issues, licensing issues, maybe because the movies had the Battle of Black Gate. Whatever reason, it ends up being a very odd scenario. Like, to some extent, there were strings. Like, you had these missions connected. Like, oh, you had Legolas' story, Gimli's story, Boromir's story, and then, you know, connecting Lothlorien and then moving on to Helm's Deep. But these 2 missions just don't make a lot of sense. Like, Minas Morgul I could tolerate, but this final mission is just like, okay, it's like, oh, We're fighting for a pass to reach the Black Gate. Anyway, you do advance. You do set up an expansion point, and then you get the super duper Balrog spawning. The Balrog is an ability unit. Basically, with fate points that you get through fighting enemies, you can summon one for a large number of these, but it only lasts a certain limited period of time. This one lasts forever. On top of that, there are various shrines that buff it even further. Basically, it can one-shot any one of your heroes, destroy your entire army with ease by default. The way to deal with it is to destroy all the enemy forces protecting the shrines, claim them for yourself, disable the Balrog's buffs, and then kill it. Even without these shrines, the Balrog is an incredibly powerful unit that can absolutely obliterate your entire army. And even your super duper heroes that have been buffed, though they are not resurrectable by this stage. So you deal with that, you deal with the Balrog, and dependent on how many shrines you've taken out and how much of the enemy force you've taken out on the map, things can be either very easy or difficult. Because up until this point, the enemy army is pretty passive, defending certain strong points. After this, they'll actually start getting activated, training units, and trying to stop you. But having dealt with the super powerful Balrog, assuming you have any decent army left, you should be able to deal with the enemy base with ease. And thus the game concludes in a fairly unsatisfactory manner, really. It's kind of a shame because there was a build-up genuinely in quite a lot of these scenarios. There was something that was going on, and then we get these very unsatisfactory campaign missions with Minas Morgul and the pass mission against the Balrog. It's not even a fun, and these are not even fun missions really, because like Minas Morgul was a joke once I realized that I could just prevent the Nazgul from swarming my base by blocking the bridge with Elven archers and heroes and just dealing with the occasional orc attack on that bridge. And the past mission, yeah, the Balrog is a nightmare to deal with, but it's also fairly slow and you can avoid it until the final battle, and once you kill it, the mission is pretty much over. But that is the good campaign. I admit I had some fun in these missions, but also frustration in missions at Helm's Deep. But for the most part, it was okay. Just a very disappointing ending to this campaign. Very brief, ultimately, and much too short. But now we move on to the Evil campaign. We move on to the Evil campaign, and right off the bat, things start out in a bit of a different way. Your first mission is to escort a group of slaves to the front lines in Rohan, where Sauron is apparently pushing the Rohirrim out of their territory. The orcs ate their last slave, so you need more slaves to fuel the economy. The leader of the orc forces, Grishnak, can't even be bothered to undertake this mission. Now, this mission is supposed to be a tutorial time mission where you're learning base building and all that, but honestly, it's pretty awful as a mission. One of the things I don't miss about older games is these horrible tutorial missions where they really limit you as a player in more ways than one. Unit-wise, resources-wise, all that, and force you to deal with what you've got. In this particular mission, there's a lot of enemy forces on the map. The problem is you have very, very limited resources, so if you just go off to fight with your initial army, which is very small, you will be wiped out pretty quickly. It's much better from a gameplay perspective to just spend the entire mission, or most of them in the mission, like 80% of the mission, just turtling up in your base. You're not going to get attacked, building up an army to the maximum range units, archer units of the orcs, and then attacking. But this is pretty boring. Anyway, you go through the Gondorian Rohirrim ranger forces and eventually escort the slaves to the other side, where they probably get eaten as well. So, mission failed, really. After this, we get a proper mission involving Grishnak with the actual offensive against Rohan. Your objective on this map is to initially take down a camp of Rohan. You'll build up a force, do so, and the base you destroy is a good expansion point. However, a few riders of Rohan escape and light the beacons of Gondor. Rohan calls for aid, and a massive combined army of Rohan and Gondor is going to emerge and pummel you into the dirt. You can delay this by destroying those aforementioned beacons. There's also a shrine around the map that gives you a benefit. Taking that will help you a good amount. So you build a massive army, destroy the beacons to delay the enemy attack, you face several attack waves and survive. It is a lot of units, but between base defenses, ranged units, orc units, you are quite able to survive this with relative ease. And one of the things comes really to mind here with War of the Ring. In a lot of missions, you're forced in these kind of situations where you're just building up a massive army and then attacking the enemy base and demolishing everything in your path. And it's a much better way of playing than trying to be aggressive all the time. But what that means is, in a lot of missions, and this applies on the good side as well, you're forced into a situation where you're being very passive for a lot of these missions. Though securing expansion points is important, but you do also want to defend them. Like 1 or 2 expansion points is enough, getting upgrades, moving on. Now after these 2 missions, really in Rohan, you are now forced to deal with the Witch King's problem. He wants to reclaim Minas Morgul, and to do so he needs to go through Mirkwood. The first of these missions involves dealing with a bunch of elves and allies of the elves through a forest. And this is really, with some of the units you're confronted, this is really where they copied Warcraft 3, because the Bjornings, you know, Bjorn, the guy who could transform in a bear in The Hobbit, how he said his entire tribe had been wiped out by the orcs. Yeah, you're dealing with that tribe here. You can also recruit them on the good side if you're playing as them. They're healers in human forms and really powerful bears when they transform, just like the Druids of the Claw of Warcraft 3. But either way, building up a massive army, you advance, you encounter some spiders. I tried to help them, but they got wiped out before I could do so. The thing is, I didn't want to be too passive, and the spiders are actually near your first expansion point, so I pushed too far ahead too quickly, got the spiders wiped out, and they would have been really useful because they have a stun lock ability with their poison. As long as they're attacking enemy unit and they have the poison upgrade, they can stun that unit, which would have been particularly useful to deal with the bears. But even so, without them, with the Witch King, with the Nazgul, with a bunch of orcs, I do clear this map. After that, we get a Minas Morgul map. Though we're not actually going to enter Minas Morgul, we need to claim a bunch of shrines around Minas Morgul to drive terror into the hearts of the elves, and they will abandon the map. There's also an enemy hero that's going to attack your forces constantly, though you can't kill him. By the way, you fight for a bunch of elves, horns, Bjornings, and other units, take the shrines, and drive the elves from Minas Morgul. And this is really the point when you fully realize that a lot of the maps, or a good number of the maps in the campaign, get reused between the good and evil side, though not necessarily all of them. But the Minas Morgul map certainly does get reused, as well as some other maps, or some variations of other maps. By the way, after you deal with these 2 missions, you're 4 missions in, 6 to go. At this point, you get some choices. You have a mission to recruit the trolls with the Nazgul, and the mission to get the Uruk-hai with Saruman, to create the Uruk-hai with Saruman. Now, the whole thing about the Uruk-hai is a bit complicated. If you've only seen the movies, you'd believe that the Uruk-hai had been created by Saruman, but really they always existed. Saruman just improved on their quote-unquote design. Either way, I first opted to go for the trolls. Now, the troll mission is very deceptive. You start with the Nazgul, small base, you have to build a force, deal with trolls, but the trolls are not really a problem. They'll be very passive, maybe 1 attack on your base. There's 3 troll hovels and you need to destroy them. The last one you destroy, you will get to keep, damaged as it is. The thing is, every time you destroy one of the hovels, you will also get the troll units of their respective base, assuming you haven't killed them, and you'll also get the stone hurler spawning as well. So you might think, oh, okay, I can just take the Nazgul, kill the hovels, ignore the trolls. The Nazgul certainly have enough HP to be able to do it, especially if I send some units and ignore some of the bone cleavers, the big melee guys. Just take some range damage, deal with it, get the expansion points. However, once you do recruit the trolls, you are faced with legions of humans, rangers, Gondorians, Rohirrim, and dwarves. The humans, not too big of an issue. The dwarves, however, with their shield breakers and their axe throwers, very different affair. And the thing is, they will attack all of your bases. They'll attack your expansion points, they'll attack your main base, and you don't want those expansion points. So again, we're forced into another mission where we have to be very passive, though this actually is not as big of a problem. You can take 2 of the troll camps before you take the 3rd, and thus trigger the arrival of the humans and the dwarves. Like, the way the mission is portrayed to is like, oh, you get the trolls, and their test, if you will, is to deal with the humans and the dwarves, thinking that it would be a cakewalk. In reality, you're faced with a brutal slog of a fight, which is probably one of the hardest missions in the entire campaign, as the dwarves and humans will send a lot of units your way. They're independent of one another, so they'll attack different points at the same time, and you need to deal with that. The best thing, just get 2 of the 2 troll hovels, or just ignore the hovels. Just get 1, get an expansion point on it, get the extra resources, get the upgrades, get the units. Archers, trolls, Asgul will do the trick. But one of the things also stands out is the limitation with heroes. Like, the first mission has no hero. This mission, you only start with an Asgul, which are elite units, but they're not really heroes, and you can't replenish them. There are some missions where we don't start with heroes, but can get them later on, or you may start with only 1 hero and get others later on. The evil campaign is a bit of a mess from this perspective. By the way, once you assemble a vast enough army, wipe out the humans, wipe out the dwarves, and move on to the Uruk-hai. The Uruk-hai mission starts out with basically a stealth mission. Oh, I love stealth missions in real-time strategy game. They're always fun. Not really. I generally find them insufferable. It's a waste of time. Like, if I'm playing a base building RTS, I'm here to play a base building RTS, not a fucking stealth mission. But you start with a group of Haradrim and have to kill the wild men who apparently the orcs are afraid of. Once you kill the wild men, things open up. You get your workers, you get the full access to your base, Saruman, all that, and now you have to get the Uruk-hai. To get the Uruk-hai, you need to corrupt the Barrow dens in this region. And get Barrow whites. Now, these are very specific whites that you can only get like 6 of them. If you lose them, you lose the mission. You combine an Orc Slasher, your basic Orc unit, your basic Orc melee unit, with a white on the circle. This can be bugged out. I think it's you send the white first and the Slasher, though sometimes even that doesn't work. It took me a couple of attempts. But either way, you do this, and you start getting Uruk-hai. Now, during all of this, your main base and the circle will both be attacked, so you need to maintain an army at both. Saruman is really good as a hero because he can mind control some units, but you are going to face human and elven attacks on both locations. You lose the Uruk-hai that are transforming, or in the cocoons, you lose the mission. You lose your main base, you lose the mission. Now, once you get the Uruk-hai, hopefully all 6 of them, like I really did want to get all 6 of them, you then take them for a test, similar with the trolls. Though in this case, you're not facing hordes of shield breakers that are very difficult to kill and reduce the armor of your units. In this case, you're dealing with humans and elves, or Hiram, Gondorians, and elves. And so the Uruk-hai will absolutely destroy them with relative ease. The Uruk-hai are the equivalent of the elven archers in this campaign, for the evil side. Though in an important way, they are actually better than the elven archers. I feel they're more durable. Their damage is about the same. But more crucially, they have a knockback attack. The elves have perma-stealth, but that's not really too big of a deal with detectors like rangers and wraiths. However, the elven archers are not going to be as useful as the Uruk-hai are. So, welcome to the Uruk-hai range stack. That's what you're going to use at this point, with a couple of units just to soak some damage, though the Uruk-hai are quite capable of dealing with that. One of the things to mention, by the way, about range combat in this game is that, similar to Battle Realms, if units get stuck in melee, if ranged units get stuck in melee, unlike many other real-time strategy games, they will lose a lot of their effectiveness and actually transition to a melee mode where they are far less effective than their range mode. Range is still the way to go, but you also need to consider that aspect. In fact, I think this actually was a very clever thing that Liquid Entertainment did for both Battle Realms and for this title, in that in a lot of real-time strategy games, focusing on range firepower really is the way to go for the vast majority of them. Thinking of Age of Empires, Warcraft, all that kind of stuff. Like, the range meta is a thing. Like, think of Warcraft 3. Human is riflemen, undead is crypt fiends, night elves are archers, and then dryads. Though the druid of the claw certainly works. Here, however, while range is still the meta, it's not immune to melee. Melee can actually work very well. Though for the purposes of a campaign, it is better to focus on ranged. For the purpose of multiplayer, I think there would have been some interesting choices, but those never really materialized. Though I'm always reminded of all the times I played Battle Realms, and I couldn't just make a ranged army because I'd get destroyed if I tried to do so. I really needed a good amount of melee to soak some damage. There. Anyway, you get the Urukai, you destroy the Elven and human bases, and you move on. After this, there's only a couple of missions left. One of them is Upborn, where you get to see the developers reusing a map that they made for Rohan in one of the most pointless missions in both Good and Evil campaign. In this, it's even more pointless, as the Haradrim, led by Selene, female Haradrim character, assassin, whatever. Very weird thing, and not at all lore accurate. I mean, the Haradrim having assassins is also very, very questionable, but either way, you have to use the assassins to kill the Rohirrim leader in the main hall. Or you could just send an army through the city and take it out like that. You can also get the Witch King to help you out in this particular mission. But yeah, not really the greatest mission, honestly, gameplay-wise. I mean, there is an enemy base outside the city that you have to deal with, but I guess, you know, oh, we made the map, we put a lot of effort, let's reuse it. The map itself, by the way, doesn't have great pathfinding. But yeah, another one of those missions you have to build up from scratch. And one of the things that did annoy me constantly throughout all of these campaigns is I had to build a lot. Like upgrades, units, structures, all that. Like a lot of missions I would start with very, very little. And there's always a base building element in every strategy game, but the fact I'm starting from so very little and so many missions and I have so much downtime is not exactly the greatest experience in the world. An interesting note, by the way, regarding the evil side is that your Haradrim share the same damage and defense upgrades as your Urukai. Say hello to the Haradrim Urukai meta, really, if you will. So anyway, once we deal with this completely and utterly pointless mission, we get to something more interesting. Minas Morgul and Carafungol. A series of 3 missions that mark the end of the campaign. The first one is to take Carafungol, though it is defended by a vast force of enemies. Elves, humans, Rohirrim, Horns, it's like the entire might of the free peoples of Middle-earth is assembled here. And you are forced to march on Carafungol and liberate it, and for the Dark Lord. You do this. You take Carafungol, you deal with the forces outside, you move inside, you fight a series of brutal battles along the way with the Witch King and other heroes. And then we move on to executing or butchering the people of Rohan and Gondor that tried to flee from Carafungol when the fortress fell. In this mission, you're dealing for the passes of Carafungol, though realistically they would have gone into Aphelion, really. But either way, you are chasing down the forces of Rohan, and the mission kind of starts in an amusing way.
Boys, there aren't enough of us. I won't die like some fool. You will die if I tell you to die.
Now, why the orc was cowardly and didn't want to pursue them when they had just completely obliterated them, and they have a vast force in this area, allies that are helping them, and the enemy isn't that tough, yeah, questionable. A bit funny, but questionable logic. Anyway, you build an army, you wipe them out, you get harassed by elves going up on a cliff, but a couple of archers and Urukai will deal with that. Once you have enough forces, you move on, you go for some barricade. And this is where you realize that the enemy doesn't really have many good avenues to attack you because they've blocked the road from their base to your base, outside of some harassing attacks. So it's very easy to build up to build up forces and advance when you're feeling ready for it. You could even advance through the first barricade very quickly, though that's not recommended since there's a lot of static forces. The goal is to reach the enemy base and destroy it. Along the way, you will see allied orcs fighting the humans of Rohan and Gondor and elves. And then and this culminates in a major fight in their base. And at this point, once this fight is over, and the humans are dead and the elves are dead, the Urukai just kind of pack up and leave. And it's like, well, the Nazgul want to deal with Minas Morgul, we don't care. Like, they want to deal with it on their own. And so this leads to the final mission of the campaign, Minas Morgul, or Minas Ithil, taking Minas Ithil for the Dark Lord. You start with fuck all, except the slave master and some slaves, to build up a base and deal with the final mission. It's like, yeah, the Nazgul are so arrogant that they besieged Minas Ithil on their own. Now, this is the same map as Minas Morgul, so the bridge, as usual, is a choke point. There's a lot of enemy forces, but build a massive stack of Uruk-hai, you will swarm through them and kill them with relative ease. And then you have to drive some slave posts around the map. Slave posts that in a good campaign you would have to destroy as they're dealing AoE damage to your units. Drive those slave posts, and the units, the Gondorians inside the Tower of the Moon are butchered through the magic of the Dark Lord. As you start driving these posts, a bunch of Gondorian soldiers will start spawning, but since you've destroyed all the enemy forces around the map by this stage, it's a joke to just slaughter them. Hell, you could just sit here for hours killing Gondorians again and again and again, and they would have no recourse against your Uruk-hai since they only have crap melee infantry. So anyway, you drive in the slave posts, and the mission ends, and thus the campaign ends. How do I feel about the evil campaign? Well, I think it's got a better conclusion than the good one. The good campaign has a much better set of early missions, be it Gimli's missions, Legolas's missions, Helm's Deep, Lothlorien, and Osgiliath, but falls short towards the very end of it. Whereas the evil campaign has a bunch of very questionable early missions, but the last 3 missions, with their arc, as it were, are much better than it. Though you do have Saruman, Grishnak, and Selene that you can recruit in this mission, which is like, well, 2 of these guys shouldn't even be alive, Grishnak and Selene, and Saruman shouldn't have turned evil by this point. But hey, I guess the developers just wanted to give you that gameplay option. Overall, how do I feel about War of the Ring? Well, I think it's good from a technical standpoint. I think the fact that you can pick it up and play it with relatively few issues on a modern computer really does say something about the engine of this game. The only issue you will encounter from a technical standpoint is if you use a fan-made patch to allow 1080p, 1920 by 1080, and then you'll have some issues with the bounds of maps. But outside of that, no major issues, no performance, no crashes, nothing of the sort. So the game runs very well on modern systems, like no compatibility or anything like that required to get it running, which is a big point in its favor. Gameplay-wise, it's pretty okay. Building on Battle Realms, and in some ways devolving on the formula of Battle Realms, which I think was, a lot of people would agree, was a better formula than the traditional base building that this game uses. But the missions themselves, some of them are okay, a lot of them end up being weak, and the experience is okay, but nothing too memorable. And I think this is ultimately what doomed this game. It's just not a fairly memorable one. It's something like, if you want to spend 12 hours of your life into, yeah, you can do so, and it won't be a miserable experience. But once you do that, you won't really have too many reasons to come back unless you're bored and you have nothing else to play years down the line. And that's always been the case for me. Like, I play this game occasionally when I get the urge to play Lord of the Rings sometimes. And generally that will result in me playing Battle for Middle-earth, playing that, enjoying that to a degree, getting frustrated with the many issues that game has, and then playing this as well. I would say that this is actually less frustrating than a lot of other older games that I've played throughout the years and replayed throughout the years. Certainly feels less frustrating than Battle for Middle-earth, but also doesn't have the highs of those kind of games. Like, it doesn't have the epic moments of something like Battle for Middle-earth, or the music gameplay, Minas Tirith, Helm's Deep, all that kind of stuff. It doesn't have the same impact as that game. So it's a mediocre title at the end of the day. And that's why it ended up being a forgotten game by a lot of people. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. If you do enjoy my content, please do consider supporting me via PayPal or Patreon for donations. I could really use the help in this day and age. We're all going through some difficult times. Like, the whole world is going through some difficult times over the last couple of years. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So if you do enjoy the content, if you enjoy what I'm doing, please do donate even a couple of dollars. It would help me a great deal. Stay tuned for more.